Item number 5, discussion on request to amend the Farragut Municipal Code, Appendix A, zoning, Chapter 4, Section 13, outdoor site lighting to allow for baseball and softball fields lighting that is custom designed not to affect neighboring properties. Jeff Jordan, applicant. And this is for discussion purposes only.
Yeah, First Baptist Church, as you all know, they've expanded their school functions over the years, and they'd like to have the opportunity to have baseball and softball games in the evenings. And, of course, critical to that is the ability to have field lights, ball field lights. So when they came to us and was talking about this request, we don't have anything that specifically addresses this kind of situation. We have outdoor site lighting provisions in our zoning ordinance, and they don't really address ball field lighting. The only ball field lights that we have in the town currently are on public properties, either town parks or the Knox County schools. Of course, Knox County governs their property, so we don't really have anything that deals with private situations like that. The only thing that we have in our current outdoor site lighting provisions deal mostly with exterior lights on buildings and then parking lot lights on private parking lots. And the maximum height of poles in our current provisions is 28 feet. Due to the direction of angle that you need to illuminate most ball fields, that's just not going to be tall enough, and what you end up with, let me pull this up real quick, with a lower pole you actually ended up causing more problems with the neighbors because of the angle of the lights. So you have more spillover with the lighting if you were to comply with our current pole height provisions. So they're requesting to provide an exception in the pole height to allow taller poles for aimable sports lighting applications that would not affect neighboring properties. So the church reached out to a lighting expert from Musco Lighting. That's the same contractor the town uses. In fact, we've got some of their lights that are at our parks, some new lights that aren't operational yet on our tennis courts at McPhee that Musco did. So basically they put together some language that would ensure that the current requirements that we have for the foot candle strength at property lines is met with these type of lights, and that's 0.5 in a residential setting. And then they added an additional standard, which is something that we don't currently have, and it's a measurement that the lighting expert can talk about this a lot better than I can. It's called a candela. And candela is kind of a relatively new way to measure the directional intensity of lighting. So that's real important, obviously, in a ball field light setting. And they've established a standard of 7,500 candela, 150 feet from field edge, so that the effect of that is that it only illuminates the ball field. There's no spillover onto abutting property. So the kind of lights that you might associate with ball fields in the past, and they probably still some of these around, unlike this lower image where you can see them for miles away, is completely different from what they're proposing and what would be required with the standard that they're recommending. As far as going out and looking in the area to see if there's some lights like this, I'm told that over at Alcoa football field, high school, they have these new lights, so you might get the opportunity to go over there and watch Alcoa beat somebody to death, like I've seen many times. Then it'd be worth it to see that and to check out their lights. So the game will be over by the end of the first quarter.
Unless they're playing there.
So you don't have to. Yeah, that's the only team that
As an
they
alumni,
struggle with. That's right. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the new lights at the tennis courts at McPhee will have a similar technology to this. So when we talked about this item at the staff developer meeting, The height of the lights range from 60 to 80 feet, and that's generally consistent with what we have at our parks. And there was a question about whether, if the commission and the board are okay with providing for this, if there should also be kind of a cap on the height. And it was stated that if it was capped at 80 feet, that would pretty much accommodate almost any kind of ball field light that you would likely see in this community. So that's just something to think about there. But that was kind of an overview. I'm not by any means a lighting expert. I think if you had technical questions about what they're requesting, what a 7,500 candela, 150 feet from the playing edge, I don't really know exactly what that means, other than the end result is that there's no spillover once you leave the field of play. And I have looked online, and that's a pretty consistent standard, 7,500 candela. So, you know, it seems to be in line with some other communities that are using this newest of lighting technology. Lighting is something that just is kind of like telecommunications. It's constantly evolving. And we're in the process of engaging the lighting person to help us with updating our outdoor site lighting provisions. And we may be presenting some things with that as well next month. But this is what's being requested at this time. And if you have any questions, I think the representative from Musco is here, and he certainly can answer the questions probably much better than I can. I do have some people that have signed up to speak on this whenever you're ready for that.
I have a question first. On one of the pictures you showed, the parking lot looked really dark. Is what?
That?
Yes.
And that's exactly what the objective is. You're only illuminating the playing field so that you have no spillover light. Once you leave that playing field, it's almost like going from, like flipping a light switch off, as I understand it. It's very, they can really target the playing field, really zero it in precisely with this newest technology. And that's why the height is important, because depending on the field of play that you're trying to illuminate, if it's not high enough for certain application, then that spillover becomes more difficult to control. So they have a range of 60 to 80 feet on their poles. There's some that are 60, and there's some that are 80, and there's some that are 70. So it's just depending on where they're at on the site and what they're trying to illuminate, with the end result trying to be to not, have any spillover.
Mark, I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at maybe standards that we could adopt all throughout the town that has to do with any kind of sports fields lighting, mostly at the town parks.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think there's a lot of good information in here that should be applicable everywhere. Not just here, but maybe some things as we upgrade and change and renovate and build new ball fields in the town of Farragut.
Oh, absolutely.
I think these are things that this is great information for us to look at and to be able to adopt some standards that would work everywhere in the town.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah, that would, because we have parks that abut residential areas, and we want to be good neighbors, and I think we are good neighbors. And if we have some tools that help us improve in that regard, then I think we're very open to that. So, yeah, I think it'd be good.
Mark, refresh my memory. What are we doing at Top Golf?
I'm trying to remember what they did. I think there's some provisions in that zoning district for the pole heights.
Yeah, we dealt with the pole heights on that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we were as concerned about spillover due to the fact that they've got interstate side on one side and pretty much
I know we
surrounded.
dealt with
They
it,
really don't have any
and-
residential. I don't know how many
No.
yards or feet closest residential is, but
Proposing if they looked into something like this, it might be a benefit to
I
them. too.
personally, I like the way it looks. I think it looks real classy when you got the ball field just, kind of almost focused with the light, and you don't get all the spillover.
Well, I'm still concerned about the safety in a parking lot.
Well, that's a
You could have
completely
separate lighting.
different
You could have
application.
separate
They
parking
just,
Separate lots.
they just don't have any.
25 feet tall
This
in
is
the parking
just
lots.
a,
So
yeah.
there will be lighting in the parking
Well,
lot.
yeah, I mean,
They're not required, though. We don't require lighting in parking lots. It's really an optional. If you do,
this image is just
Right.
to show you what the
Show
ball
them.
field light would look with this kind of application, where it is pretty much only on the playing surface and it doesn't spill over into the parking lot.
But from an aspect of safety, we do need at some point in time to consider lighting in the parking lots as
Well,
well.
I mean, and I think that's what I mentioned earlier. We need to update our outdoor site lighting section. It's only 2 pages, but with all the lighting technologies that continue to evolve, I mean.
and the
we've got
nomenclature is now changing.
Nomenclature,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, wattage is like archaic. Nobody uses that. That just measures energy output. Has nothing really to do with lighting. Yeah, so we're going to try to work on that too. I'm not sure where that will be exactly at that point next month, but it won't hold them up. But that's what they're requesting, is just to basically amend that height, the pole height, and to provide for this opportunity, if y'all are open to that and the board.
Okay.
I have some comments on this.
Okay?
I spent some time researching, I use that term loosely, that means looking on the internet, so take that in mind. And I'm not an illuminating engineer, so take that in mind as well. But it looks to me like the product that Musco has offers good lighting and low spillover, and I think that's great. And it looks like our ordinance needs some fine tuning to represent that, some guidance on those lines. But my problem is with some of the specific wording of the 7,500 candela from 150 feet. As I researched it and as I looked, it seems to me that, as far as I could see, that Musco was the only supplier/vendor that actually has that specification, which if we incorporate that into our ordinance, we've therefore excluded everybody else. So it turns out that there are some standards, and there's actually a model law that was written by the International Dark Sky International in coalition with the Illuminating Engineering Society, and they put together a model ordinance. And in that ordinance, the term candela is not in the ordinance at all. They have different ways of measuring spillover and what they call trespass light and all the other different terms. So the bottom line is, I'm in agreement that we need to revise. The 80-foot probably tower height is probably fine, but I'm a little worried about the specific candela. Perhaps we should say that as a target, and that we should meet recognized international standards for lighting, rather than making this particular standard mandatory in our regulation.
I mean, I'll defer to the lighting expert on those kind of questions.
I have to agree with John on that, because what we've learned at the staff developer was about the candela, and it's the first that you really, I've heard about it, or anybody has, because we've had conversations with Topgolf, we've had conversations with the town center on lights, and none of this has been with that particular word in it. So I think more of a universal standard that everybody else, I mean, maybe someday candela will be the normal buzzword, but right at this moment it's not. So I don't think we need to really get hung up on a new word that does not have a universal standard, because then you're limiting the vendor to one person, and that's not really.
And we use foot candles in that. We don't have a pole height that I can see in that, I haven't gotten a chance to read it thoroughly, the Outlet Drive Regional Entertainment and Employment District, but we use foot candles as the requirement in that.
And maybe the applicant can tell us the difference between foot candles and candela.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks for having me here. And you're exactly right. Candela is a measurement.
Tell us your name and your address for the
Yeah,
record.
First of all, tell us your name and address and who you're with.
And Jeff Jordan again, I'm the actual applicant. This is the representative from Musco Lighting that we brought.
Okay, thank you. And your name?
Thanks.
My name's Greg Gilly, and from Greenville, Tennessee. So I was just going to address this. You're exactly right. This Candela came about recently with the LED lights. It started in the parking lot industry, started seeing it, the parking lot lights that you were referencing, is because they learned that measurable light is foot candles that we've all talked about for 30 years. And Candela is glare. It's a measurement of glare. And we're involved with IDA for dark skies. We're on the board. And also IES. And this is a very forward-thinking term. And I thought that it would be a good opportunity to bring this up. And since we were talking LED sports lighting, the foot candles of a half a foot candle on a property line seems to be nationally wide. That's what everybody tends to fall back on. And that's a great standard. And then the other thing that we added in the verbiage of the amendment text is aimable lights, where that gets you where your pole heights are concentrating all your light on the ball fields instead of going out in Horizon or the neighborhoods or, being good neighbors. Candela is new. I mean, it's a new term. They got a new meter where you can measure glare. Glare used to be very subjective. So when you're driving down the road, something may be glary to somebody, and then somebody else, it's not glary at all. If they, depending on their medical condition or their eyes, or if they're wearing prescription glasses. So that's where we came up with that. And just to be fair, the Candela and measurement of glare is not a Musco thing. That's industry-wide measurement. Where we get to as far as the 7,500 is another conversation. It started out, it was 10,000, and then it's been as low as 5,000 on measurements. Low beam headlights are 12,000 Candela. So where we got that 7,500 was actually out of the IES, and that's based on a rural community having lighting. If you're in a city, it would be 25,000 Candela, and then a subdivision would be about 10,000. So being familiar with Farragut, that I landed on the very conservative 7,500 just for conversation. I mean, we can talk. I'd be more than happy to talk, or we could just forget about Candela altogether. But you guys are a great community, and what we've seen is just because it's no measurable light, I mean, we may have 0 foot candles, but if there is a sports lighting applicant that's not focusing that light right, then the neighbors 300 or 400 foot away, it's going to be glary to them. If they call you guys and say, well, it's glary, we'll take a light meter out there, and it'll be 0 foot candles, but it's still glary. So I was just presenting this to help you guys as a resource, to help protect you guys. It's more, you're probably seeing some glary parking lot lights and street lights at 12 foot, because when the illuminations change from metal halide to LED can be really glary if it's not controlled right. So that's why the Candela, this glare measurement and everything is coming up front, but it's on the very front end. We're seeing it in California, Texas, and to be honest, this is the first time I've presented it to a town in Tennessee. So it is new, and I'm willing to help you guys, or we can just, forget about Candela and glare, but it's not a Musco thing. Glare has been around on everybody's fixtures. Musco is also, we do all the National Park and Rec. We're on the board of directors for National Park and Rec with Mount Rushmore and all our big parks. So we're very familiar with IDA and Dark Sky Association.
It's
Let
kind
me
of
ask
funny
you a
that.
question.
Yes,
Go ahead,
sir.
Ed.
Are you the only vendor, or are there other vendors in the United States that can relate to a spec of like 7,500 Candela in a specification?
Oh, absolutely. There's other vendors that can do it. Absolutely.
So it's more of a generic term than.
Like
than
foot
we
candles that you're
realize.
familiar with. Yes,
So
yes.
electrical engineer, when you say Candela, they're going to know exactly what we're talking about.
Well, they're
If they're a lighting engineer.
Yes, sir.
What I'd like to do, and it's probably, I don't think it's appropriate tonight, but as we kind of work through this and start drafting some language, is maybe take the handheld device and go out to the parking lot, and you can show us, hey, this is the X number of foot candles, and based on a Candela, it's this or whatever, because I think that's what people want to know. Well, show me what it's going to look like. Because we can all use these things that sound great, and we can look at, actually, this actually looks like it actually might be a photograph, not a rendering. It says it's Cedar Stone Park in Smyrna. But nevertheless, I think what I would like to see is show us where one stops and one begins, and some of these things in actually application. We probably have some residents that would like to see that too, because, we can look at all the pretty pictures we want, but we're not really sure until you actually see it. Quite frankly, the town, the way we've enforced our lighting ordinance has actually kind of been an anti-glare ordinance. So you'd have an individual that's a staff member that has to drive around and determine, is that glare or not? Because it was kind of anti-glare. That's glare. And then you would have a different interpretation of it, just like what you said. And it's not really fair to the staff because it's kind of subjective.
It varies.
And so, I love where we're going with this, because I personally struggled with the lighting ordinance in the town of Farragut because it's subjective. And I think that there's, with all the new technologies that are available that no one would have dreamt of 10 or 20 years ago, there's a lot of things that you can do nowadays. Back in those days, if you put a metal, a 400 watt metal halide up at 80 feet, I mean, there's light bleeding all over the place. And so, because that was the only technology that was available, but things have changed now. So it's super exciting. I hope that, I hope the applicant has some time to kind of work through this, because I think this would be a town-wide change to an outdated lighting ordinance, not to pick on the staff, but the reality is until we have an applicant that says, hey, you guys need some changes to get up with the times, there's no reason to change it. But now we've got somebody that's interested in doing some things and they're trying to be good neighbors. So I'm really excited about trying to move forward with some changes, and I'll yield the floor to other commissioners. And I think there's some folks in the audience that'd like to spend a few moments in talking about their concerns.
I've got one overarching kind of comment that says, we're focused so much on lighting. What we're talking about here is the path forward for a private field. So you get into things like PA systems, hours of operation. There's more than just lighting. Lighting's just one dimension of this.
Well, I agree. I think some of our rules should apply both to public and private fields. I mean, so now a lot of our fields are not used at night. I think the Anchor ones at Anchor Park, seems they're not even lit at all.
Dark park. Yeah.
But the Watt Road parks are lit, and McPhee, are they lit at McPhee?
They will be.
They will be lit. And so, I mean, I think these are things that we should talk about.
I'm just saying,
whether it's public or private.
More than just one dimension to it.
I agree. Yeah, sure.
You have swim meets now that, where you have lit pools and, they chop it off at 10 o'clock. That's,
Yeah.
You've got to get it done before then, and then the lights have to go down.
Yeah.
It's another aspect of what we will be looking at. Like what Ed said, there's more to it than just the light. This happens to be what's in front of us right
It's a
now.
big part of it, but it's not the only part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to say something as a high school student. I've recognized the importance of having your own sports fields. But I am a bit concerned about the parking lot, because without lights, you have a bunch of teenagers probably together in cars. In a dark parking lot, that can be kind of dangerous because teenagers are kind of reckless. We know this. I'll say it.
Glad you said it.
I'm not afraid to admit it.
Thank you for your comment.
But obviously with these taller poles, the distance doesn't go into these people's houses. But if we have these shorter poles in the parking lots, will the light not go into the subdivision?
Well, I think the picture was meant to convey that the light is focused directly on the field without having bleed over. And the bleed over is the most important thing, because we're trying to show that we don't light up neighbors' yards. So the thought would be that if this kind of language was approved, you would have lighter or taller lights for field only. And then once you got into a parking lot, if you lit it, it would meet the city standards,
down.
which is, I believe, 28 feet maybe.
It's a different kind of lighting, because on the ball field, you have to have an angle.
Yeah.
See, in parking lot lights, they have to be shining straight down.
Straight down.
Okay.
So it's a completely different kind of lighting application.
Well,
between
if you
the two.
use the way, the philosophy behind the lights we use for parking lots, you would have a light probably at second base, and you'd have, which obviously doesn't work. So you can't just put poles out in the middle of a softball field or a football field or a baseball field. So we've got to use the technology. The only way to get these larger areas, these larger surface areas, you got to go a little taller. But with the technology now allows you to focus the light. I think it's real intriguing. I do kind of have concerns about, teenagers, they see dark parking lots, but we do have lots of dark parking lots in the town, and they're going to be an attractive nuisance whether we like it or not. But You know, I think that's
be
something.
lit by parking lot lights. If the property owner wants parking lot lights, and those parking lot lights would have to meet our
That's true.
outdoor site lighting
Current
requirements.
standards.
I think having a glare standard, like you said, Noah, would really benefit the town staff, because we struggle with that.
I know.
We've had some other kind of lights that recently that have been used, some string lights that we like, conceptually the idea, but some people think it's creating glare. And so what is glare? You know, so having maybe something that can actually measure that and provide some standards
Piece of
that on the
equipment
front
to measure.
end that you have to meet, that would basically ensure that you meet a recognized glare standard, would be a real benefit to the town for sure.
Lee, we'd like to know the brand and where to get that meter at, okay?
Got that for him.
Thank you.
One thing, you mentioned the PA. The reason we're here talking about lighting tonight is because it's a problematic issue for what any sports field would be trying to do. So that's one thing we identified as, hey, if we're going to try to do this, that's got to be dealt with. Any other items like that, we would abide by whatever rules you guys decide on ultimately. So we understand that there's still things that we have to correspond to pull something like this off.
And so you and your business are the ones that are working with the fields as well, not just in addition to the building?
Yes, ma'am. We've got Musco on board to kind of help us with lighting input for, it's a high-tech field, and unless you have the guy that does it for a living, it's hard to talk about it. We've engaged a civil engineer who, at a later date, would provide a full site plan submittal for your decision-making.
Okay, thank you.
I want to clarify is that this is just dealing with the lighting amendment right now. So what they've shown on renderings of the church area that may or may not meet other requirements, it would have to be adjusted
Okay.
to meet, certain requirements, setbacks and whatever. So, I just want to be clear about that. And I do have some people that have signed up.
Anybody else on the planning commission have any questions at this point? Okay, then let's go to
The first one is Tom Reed, and after Tom, David White.
and like I said before, tonight, this is for discussion only. We're not voting on anything.
My name's Tom Reed, 320 Farragut Crossing Drive, Knoxville, Tennessee.
320.
Excuse me. And I've been a neighbor of the church for over 27 years. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but we've been able to work our differences out. I wish I almost stayed at home now after Mr. St. Clair made his comment that lighting is just really a small piece of what we're going into with the sports field arena, particularly a private one. And that's what I wanted to bring up to the commission tonight, is that you need to consider other things like noise that gets into PA and all these other kind of areas. And that's kind of what's going on now with the church and some of its neighbors. The church has a wonderful facility out there. A lot of people enjoy it. It's shared by a lot of people. But part of it is a church, part of it is a school. And because it's got this dual use, the facilities are used quite a bit, particularly the athletic fields. We may have the school football team or some other athletic team maybe practicing after school. During school, we've got the playground noise going on. On weekends, we've got soccer that the church sponsors. So it's fairly busy. And as we go into this sports field code area, I think it warrants some consideration to some noise issues and controls and how long the lights are allowed to go on at night, things like that. It sounds like you're kind of already interested in that. So that was my message. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Remind the speakers that we're on a 5-minute time per
Right.
speaker, so.
Our
and
speakers
I'm
have 5
watching
minutes,
that, so.
and he's,
David White's the next one, and after David, Jeannie Burkowski.
David White. I live at 314 Vista Trail in Belleaire subdivision. Of course, the church. We all want to respect the church and their members and everything they do, but there's some things that happened in the past that we're concerned could very well easily happen again. When the church first decided to become a school, they encroached on our subdivision. They began to buy some homes. The neighbors became concerned, and we had some meetings, and we were told that we're buying those homes for traveling evangelists, so they could stay there when they were traveling through. Not so. They promptly tore them down, moved our entrance road, and encroached on the subdivision. There was more meetings going on because an athletic field came up during the addition of the school. The pastor, who of course is not there now and has passed on, in these meetings, because the ordinance doesn't allow the fields in the first place or the lighting, and he guaranteed the subdivision residents that if they had an athletic field, there would be no lights or a PA. So the neighbors weren't too concerned about an athletic field. If you don't have it at night, you don't have the lights and you don't have the PA, it's not a big deal. Didn't turn out that way. Now they're back asking for the field. And I've been asked, is this in writing anywhere? No. One of my good friends and neighbors is here with me, has lived in there forever, was in most of the meetings. Why would you put in the lighting when you're talking to a pastor? Everybody trusts him. Didn't work out that way. You have ordinances that don't allow this. Why go through and change ordinances to encroach on our subdivision even more than they've already done? We need to leave things like they are. We've had enough. I was sitting on my screened-in porch last night about 7:30. They're having a function of something down there on one of the athletic fields. They obviously had a handheld megaphone. I could hear every word the guy said. I'm in the middle of the subdivision up over the hill down in the valley. We don't need it. They can have an athletic field. I don't think any of our neighbors care. We do not want the lights in the PA system. They can play in the middle of the day. They played football for years without lights. They can do it again. So we're asking you just to consider us. You're all excited about all these lights and lighting businesses and fields. Think about the neighborhood. Think about the neighborhood. We live there every day. We go to bed at night. We don't want to hear a PA system or fans yelling. It's one of the oldest subdivisions, if not the oldest, in the town of Farragut. Let's not change it anymore. Think about that.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, David.
So Jeannie Brukowski, and after Jeannie is Winnie Lang.
If that person, if you'll get back there and stand so you can come up next.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Brykolski. My husband and I have been residents of the, 329 Crestview Road, Farragut, Tennessee. My husband and I have been residents of Belleaire for almost 26 years. And yes, Belleaire is the oldest subdivision in Farragut. We also predated the church. It was built around 1962. Our subdivision was begun in 1949. We are an eclectic community as far as the styles and types of houses, and we have houses that are anywhere from 1,200 square feet to over 5,600 square feet. We have nice big lots with mature trees, wildlife, and we're a very unique neighborhood. The church has made several promises to us on a many variety of subjects. And unfortunately, they did not keep the majority of them. one of the promises they kept, which was in a large meeting around a bunch of people, that they were not going to have PAs or lights. And here we are. Yes, there is a problem with distrust with a lot of the people who live in Belleaire. Also Derby Chase, Glen Abbey, Farragut Crossing, Kingsgate, and even some people in Village Green. Because there are people in Village Green who can hear when they are using their portable PAs and blowhorns. Bullhorns, I guess they're actually called. I have some questions on the lighting, specifically. I was impressed by the presentation from the manufacturer's rep. I find that kind of thing interesting. I was in industrial sales for many, many years, so I was really paying close attention. But I do have some issues. Now, I do want to say FBC parking lot that's next to Belleaire, they have excellent parking lot lighting. It's really good. I mean, it even helps a little bit on Belleaire Drive. So, and I appreciate you bringing that up. That was a great, great question. So that is not something that's a, huge concern as far as being a dangerous area. But when you've got lights that tall on an area that's fairly small, that you have to have a certain size field with where the lights are, it's not just people, some of the people in Belleaire, it's also right there at Derby Chase. And I think there's one house in Farragut Crossing that might be affected. Also, when you come up Belleaire Drive, it's a little bit of an incline, and it kind of curves around, and the softball field or soccer field is to the right. And as you go up, there is a hill, and it goes up. Now, once it's dark, and those of us who live in the back part of the subdivision, as we are coming out to go wherever it is we're going to go, and we come down Belleaire and we go up that hill, will these lights anyway impact whoever's driving that vehicle? That's something I think needs to be looked at. Also, they mentioned baseball and softball. That softball field is right next to a road. If they're going to be playing baseball and softball there, using these lights, there needs to be a very tall safety fence, chain link or whatever like they do at a lot of high schools, public fields and so forth. Because baseballs and softballs are very hard, and when they get whacked really well by a player, they break windows on houses and cars, and that could cause wrecks. The little cul-de-sac that's right there next to the field, there's two houses that are very close that easily, either one of them could get a window taken out or, be in your front yard. There's all sorts of freak accidents that can happen. We in Belleaire, one of the reasons I think most of us are upset is, once again, these projects, these plans have been developed to a point that they're ready to move on them, but never once came to anybody in our subdivision and said, hey, we've got some ideas about how we would like to expand. Do you all have any concerns or questions? Can we get together and talk to you? Back when they did the big expansion, nothing was brought up to us until that was basically a done deal. And we're all like, no, we don't like this. And they were quite surprised. Why couldn't they have asked us some questions? Why couldn't they see if we had any concerns? Maybe we might have had some input that could have helped them. But no, we are ignored. And this is where the distrust, once again, comes up. There's a passage in the Bible when Jesus of the disciples, I'm sorry.
We need you to.
I'm on the end, I promise.
Your time is up.
When Jesus is talking to some of his disciples, and they ask him, what is the most important of the laws, that Jesus tells? And he says, the most important is, love thy neighbor as thyself. The church says it wants to be a good neighbor to us. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of that, but we'd really like to.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us, and Mayor, thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I really appreciate that.
Okay, we've got Winnie Ling and then Christine Haney, I guess, after that.
Hello, my name is Winnie Liang. I live in 11429 Bancroft Lane. So I guess I have a concern regarding the previous, item number 5, because it really depends on where the field is located to the road, because there are a couple of things you need to consider when you think about light, how bright it is, and the glare. So if you imagine in the road, you're driving down the road and all of a sudden there's something really, really bright in front of you, that can really impair whoever is driving on the road, and especially if that neighborhood is very hilly and bumpy. So that's just something I want to raise, and something that people should consider when they decide whether to build a field, and how far is the baseball, softball field away from the road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, we got Christine Haney, and then after her, Tim Wilson.
Christine Horvega,
Sorry, I couldn't read
that's
that.
okay, 12528 Fort West Drive, Knoxville, Tennessee. I just actually wanted to highlight one of the comments that Noah said, and I would ask that as we think about the lighting, not only for the fields, that we think about the neighborhoods, especially from the glare perspective, because I live in Fort West, and we have no sidewalks. We're not allowed to have lighting, because I moved here 10 years ago, and I asked about it. And our neighborhood gets pretty dark, and if you're on the road, there's nowhere for you to go except on someone's lawn. And a couple people have almost been hit in the evenings, and we would like to do some lights like that in some areas, but we're told there's too much glare, and you have all the light noise. So I would ask that you look at that, not only from a height, but also from a lighting for the residential areas that are looking to do that, because we've been shut down multiple times over it. So I ask that you look at that as well.
Christine, wait a minute, I got a question for you. Who shut you down?
When I went to my HOA and we had a meeting about our neighborhood.
Your HOA shut you down?
The HOA said that
Okay.
they had requested, but based on the ordinance earlier, that, and again, this was previous, when I first moved here in the first 2 or 3 years, the HOA informed me that we had actually looked into it, but because of the ordinances, we were unable to get lights, because it would go into other people's windows, and it would create the light noise, and they didn't want that, the glare. And so with these new lighting concepts, it would be great if we could start opening that up, or rewording the ordinances for the neighborhoods and subdivisions to say you can look into these kind of lights that maybe don't glare out as bad, or can be spotlighted down into the road, so that people can use those, the walking around in the evenings without having issues. Because not all of us can put sidewalks in either.
I believe it must be an HOA thing, because we put 4 of them a year in Sugarwood, and have been doing it ever since I've lived there, 30 years.
Okay.
So
Because,
there's-
they had indicated it was an ordinance, so I'll follow back up with that. Thank you.
I can say something about that because I live in that neighborhood, and it's also a cost issue. With the neighborhood having to do that themselves, we don't have a whole lot of money. And so that was one of the issues that was talked about quite a few years ago, too.
Okay, we have Tim Wilson. After him is David Starling.
Hey guys, it's Tim Wilson. I live at 301 Shadowfax Road, so that's Derby Chase. And actually in that picture there, if you look at the Warren area where it looks like somebody peeled out on a pickup truck or something and drove across the road, that's pointing right at my house. My house is right past that. So that's where I live. That's my home. I've lived there for about 20 years, and it's not the first time I've come here over an issue that has occurred with First Baptist Church. Now, I'll tell you this, I have friends that attend First Baptist Church. I don't think there's anybody there that has one nefarious desire in their heart. I think that they want to do good things, and they're thinking in this case about what they want to do. I heard you guys talk about the light and the glare a lot, about parking lot lights, but nobody's talking about 80-foot tall poles that are going to tower over my backyard. 70-foot tall poles, 60-foot tall poles, a total of 9 of these. 9 of them. And I guess I would just ask you to think about, I have a son who just had a child, he and his wife, and they bought a house over off Solway. And they're just getting started in life. If they bought that house, and right now, I got to tell you, houses are getting almost impossible to start in because the inflation is driving the cost of a home up so high. If the Planning Commission had authorized poles 90 feet high with banks of lights behind their house, I got to tell you, I'd be furious. And I would think, I'd just ask you to think about if your child bought a home, or if you bought your first home and thinking back to that immediately, what that does to the quality of life, what that does to the investment. And I can't imagine, as well as that church uses their facilities, and they use them for the community, I can't imagine they're not going to use them up into the evening. It does make a lot of noise. Now, I'm getting old, and I go to bed earlier and earlier now, and I can hear things over there when they're having activities at the field. It makes a good deal of noise. They're having a good time. God bless them for it. But it doesn't have to be there. It doesn't have to be there to convert a soul. It's beyond the purpose, in my view, of what that church is there for. And I appreciate the good things they're doing, but it doesn't have to be. And I guess I'm wondering if the ordinance were passed with an 80-foot limit, could I put a badminton net in my backyard and put 80-foot poles in my backyard and put lights on them and be a really good neighbor? I just can't imagine that. I don't think we'd allow a flagpole like that in somebody's yard. Maybe we would, I don't know. And I don't mean to be sarcastic, and I don't mean to be contentious, but this is our life. And for these folks that live in the neighborhood, for some of them, it's probably the biggest investment there is. And I can assure you that looking at that and hearing that, if people were to come and look and consider buying a house, that's going to be a red mark on the house. It's going to have some effect on the value of the homes. And so I would just ask you to think about that, and I appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
sir. Appreciate your comments.
And David Starling.
I live at David Starling, 206 Shadowfax, so I'm in Derby Chase, and I have concerns too. I guess one thing I would say, and I think the gentleman over here kind of was going down my line of concern, is that this shouldn't, in my opinion, shouldn't be viewed as a lighting issue. I think there's a systems engineering approach that ought to be taken, and not just look at the lighting, but look at the noise, look at the impact, look at the collateral factors that are going to be assessed to homeowners like me in that subdivision. So I don't know, and I don't know what those are, what all the factors are. I know it's nice in the evenings, especially in the fall, to have the windows open and nice cool breeze where I'm at. And I'm not sure what it's going to be like. Hearing the band playing, I understand the lighting is going to be restricted, but what do you do with the noise? You can control the lights maybe, but what do you do with the noise? And then there may be other factors, and I would just ask that whoever put those lighting ordinances in place originally probably did so with a lot of thought, a lot of care, probably with a lot of collaboration and decision-making. And those ordinances, and I'm not a builder, but I believe that those were put in place to help protect residents like myself and other homeowners, and to protect their concerns. And so I view them as kind of a fence. And I remember the words of Malcolm Muggeridge, who's long gone, a British writer, who said, before you remove a fence, make sure you absolutely know what it was there for. And so if we're going to revise this ordinance that right now is protecting, in my opinion, myself, make absolutely sure we know what the unintended consequences of changing it are going to be. because I am concerned about that. And it may be people who have a really good heart and they think they're doing the right thing, but it could end up with some unintended adverse consequences that now what do we do? So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Is that it?
That's all the speakers that signed up, yes.
Okay, does anybody else on the planning commission have any questions or comments? So, have we given you enough information here?
I don't know. I mean, it's,
I think I need to remind us, what we're looking at tonight is updates to the lighting ordinance, not a particular site plan. And so I'd like to move forward with some changes to the lighting ordinance that kind of reflect the technology that's available today that would be applicable everywhere in the town of Farragut. And then if there's a particular applicant that has a site plan that they'd like to propose, then we can review that site plan at that particular time.
I will say this, the reality is this lighting already exists in our town and our parks, and we don't have coverage in our ordinances to cover what we're doing in our own parks. We also have lighting on fields in Knox County, the soccer field next to Farragut Intermediate, and the lacrosse field behind Farragut Intermediate and the middle school. And those lights are the old-time lights, and they're glary, and it would be nice to push, I know this is much to ask of Knox County schools, but it would be nice to push them to, because those back up to residential neighborhoods as well.
I
As
just
well
got-
as the lights in McPhee Park at the tennis courts, they back up to an existing neighborhood. And of course, Mayor Bob Leonard is in a residential area as well. So they're existing in the town already, and we don't have any ordinances to bring them into compliance.
Yeah, it's got through replacing the lights at the high school.
And those are very bright.
Yeah, and they're very tall.
Well, whether we like it or not, the Knox County schools, they're going to be exempt from our municipal codes per the Tennessee Code Annotated, which is not put together by this body. It's put together by the folks, the legislatures in Nashville. So, with that being said, we can ask all we want, but unless they have the desire and the budget to make changes to those lights. But what we can do as commissioners and residents of the town of Farragut is when the town of Farragut has public facilities that either are proposed as new facilities or need to be upgraded or renovated, then we can take a look at our lighting ordinance and figure out how to try to bring those facilities into compliance. And that's where I think this lighting ordinance would be valuable, and we can sure ask Knox County to participate in that, and they can either acquiesce or deny.